Blood has a way of changing the air in a room. It doesn't matter how little there is. One thin line of red can suffocate a house. The first time it happened, I thought nothing of it. Chloe shuffled into the kitchen at 6:40 a.m., still wrapped in her oversized sleep shirt, one hand under her nose, eyes half closed. "Dad?" she mumbled. There was a streak of crimson across her upper lip. For half a second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then the metallic smell reached me. I grabbed paper towels, tilted her head forward, pressed gently. "It's okay," I said. Calm voice, steady hands. That's what fathers are supposed to be. Inside, something tightened. "It doesn't even hurt," she said, trying to smile through it. That smile destroyed me more than the blood did. I blamed the weather. Chicago winters chew through skin and sinuses alike. Dry heat, radiators hissing like old men. I drove to the pharmacy that afternoon and bought the most expensive humidifier on the shelf. I lined up saline sprays on the bathroom counter like weapons in a war I didn't yet understand. The next morning it happened again. And the next. Every single day. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just enough blood to stain a pillowcase. Enough to make me wash sheets before work. Enough to make Chloe roll her eyes and say, "Dad, it's just a nosebleed." But it wasn't just a nosebleed. It was routine. And routine makes things dangerous. By week 2, I had her in a pediatric clinic downtown. By week 3, we were driving across the city to a specialist in Lincoln Park. By week 4, I had memorized the smell of antiseptic and the hum of fluorescent lights. 16 tests. 16 rooms where my daughter sat on stiff paper-covered tables swinging her legs, pretending she wasn't nervous. 16 times I watched vials fill with her blood. Blood panels, hormones, clotting factors, allergy screenings, autoimmune markers, even oncology testing. I said yes to everything. I would have sold my car if someone had told me it would give me an answer. But every result came back the same. Normal, perfect, healthy. Doctors shrugged with professional detachment. "Sometimes kids get recurrent nosebleeds. It'll pass. Monitor it. Monitor it." As if I hadn't been monitoring every breath she took since she was born. I stopped sleeping properly. I would wake up in the middle of the night and walk to her room. I'd stand in the doorway and listen to the rhythm of her breathing. I'd check her pillow in the dark with my phone flashlight, praying I wouldn't see red. Sometimes I did. And every time I did, something inside me slipped further out of place. I started snapping at small things. Traffic. Co-workers. At the microwave when it beeped too loudly. Fear doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like irritation. Sometimes it looks like a man unraveling quietly. And through all of it, the bracelet stayed on her wrist. Linda had given it to her exactly 1 week before the first nosebleed. My ex-mother-in-law never visited without an agenda. That woman treated kindness like currency, always expecting a return. She showed up on a Sunday afternoon, perfume thick, smile sharp. "For my granddaughter," she said, producing a small velvet box like she was unveiling a crown jewel. Inside was a vintage metal bracelet. Heavy, old-fashioned, silver-colored with delicate floral engravings along the band. It looked antique. The kind of thing someone might find in a second-hand shop and call charming. "For good luck," Linda added, eyes sliding toward me for just a second too long. Chloe loved it instantly, slipped it on and admired it in the light. "It's beautiful," she said. Linda watched her like a scientist observing a reaction. I didn't like that look, but I said nothing, because technically, Linda had visitation rights at that point. Limited, supervised before, but the last hearing had loosened restrictions slightly. I had primary custody after the divorce from Megan, and that had poisoned Linda against me permanently. She believed I had stolen her granddaughter. In court, she'd glared at me as if I were something diseased. "You won't keep her from us forever," she'd whispered in the hallway after the ruling. I dismissed it as bitterness. I shouldn't have. Chloe wore the bracelet constantly. School, bed, shower. She said it made her feel protected, like it carried history. like it meant something. I noticed a faint green tint on the inside of her wrist once. Assumed it was cheap alloy reacting to skin oils. Normal. Harmless. That word again. Months passed. Blood every morning. 16 clean tests. No explanation. I began questioning myself. Was I exaggerating? Was I paranoid? Was I turning into one of those fathers who invent monsters where none exist? Then came the afternoon at the park. It was warmer that day. Early spring finally pushing winter out of Chicago's lungs. Chloe was on the swings, hair flying behind her, laughing for real. Not the forced smile she used at clinics. I remember thinking, maybe it's fading. Maybe this nightmare is ending. Then I saw it. The green discoloration around her wrist was darker. Not just a surface stain. It looked embedded in the skin. An elderly man was sitting on a bench nearby, reading a paperback. He stood slowly and approached us. He didn't look threatening. He looked concerned. "Excuse me," he said gently. "How long has she been wearing that bracelet?" I stiffened. Instinct. Always. "Why?" I asked. He leaned slightly closer, careful not to invade space. His eyes focused on the metal, not on Chloe's face. "That alloy," he murmured. "I've seen that before." "Seen what?" He straightened. "I'm a retired chemist. Industrial materials analysis. 40 years. He gestured subtly toward Chloe's wrist. "That green isn't simple oxidation." My pulse thudded in my ears. "What is it then?" His face lost color. "Take it off her," he said. Not loud. Not dramatic. Urgent. Now. Chloe looked confused. "Dad." I didn't hesitate. I unclasped it immediately. The metal felt cold. Heavier than it should have. "What are you saying?" I asked. He inhaled slowly. "Certain low-grade vintage alloys, especially imported ones, can contain trace heavy metals. Lead compounds, cadmium, even arsenic residues in rare cases. When they degrade, especially with moisture and body heat, they can leach." The word leach made my stomach twist. "Systemic exposure," he continued carefully, "can cause symptoms, fatigue, headaches, unexplained bleeding." Unexplained bleeding. The phrase echoed like a gunshot. "Are you sure?" I demanded. "I'm sure enough to tell you to get it tested. Independent lab. Not a jewelry store. Materials analysis. Immediately." Chloe went quiet. The swings creaked behind us. "How dangerous?" I asked. He met my eyes fully for the first time. "Dangerous enough that if I were you, I wouldn't let her touch it again." He nodded once and walked back to his bench, leaving me holding that bracelet like it was evidence. That night, I placed it on the kitchen table and just stared at it. Months of fear. 16 clean tests. A gift from a woman who hated me, and a possible source that had been on her skin every single day. I picked it up with a napkin and sealed it inside a plastic bag. And for the first time since the nosebleeds began, my fear shifted shape. It wasn't faceless anymore. It had edges, and it might have a name. I didn't sleep that night. The bracelet sat on the kitchen table inside a sealed plastic bag, like something radioactive. I kept the lights off except for the one above the stove. It cast a yellow circle over the metal, turning it into a spotlighted suspect. Chloe was asleep down the hall. No bracelet on her wrist. For the first time in months, I felt something different than blind fear. I felt direction. At 6:30 a.m. She walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. I watched her carefully, scanning for it. No blood. My heart didn't dare celebrate. "Dad?" she asked. "Why are you staring at me?" "Just checking something," I said. She touched her nose automatically. Clean. We made it through breakfast without incident. I kept glancing at her face like a man waiting for a crack in glass. Nothing. By noon, I had called 3 independent materials laboratories outside Chicago. The 4th one agreed to take the bracelet for urgent analysis. I didn't want a jewelry appraisal. I didn't want an opinion. I wanted chemistry. I drove it there myself. An industrial building an hour outside the city. No storefront. No charm. Just a metal door and a receptionist who didn't ask unnecessary questions. Chain of custody? She asked. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. I signed paperwork. Left the sealed bag on a stainless steel counter. Watched it disappear through a door marked restricted access. Then I drove home and waited. The first morning without a nosebleed could have been coincidence. The second morning felt heavier. Still nothing. On the third morning, Chloe ran into the kitchen smiling. Dad, no blood again. Maybe it's finally over. Maybe. Or maybe something had been poisoning my child slowly and we had just removed it. I didn't tell her my thoughts. Children deserve safety, not suspicion. The lab called on the fourth day. I stepped outside to take it. My hands were steady when I answered. This is Daniel Harris. A pause. Mr. Harris, we've completed preliminary analysis on the metal sample you submitted. Preliminary. Go on, I said. There are elevated levels of lead and cadmium present in the alloy. Trace arsenic compounds as well. My vision narrowed. Define elevated. High enough to be unsafe for prolonged dermal contact, especially for a child. The words landed like stones. Could exposure cause recurring nosebleeds? I asked. There was no hesitation. Yes, heavy metal toxicity can interfere with clotting function and damage capillaries. Chronic low-level exposure could absolutely present as unexplained bleeding. Chronic, low-level, unexplained. All the doctor's words rearranged themselves into something sinister. Anything else? I forced out. Pause longer this time. There are signs that the surface layer was treated recently. The corrosion pattern suggests the bracelet was modified or resurfaced within the last year. Modified. The air left my lungs. You're saying someone altered it? I'm saying the degradation is inconsistent with simple age. We're running deeper analysis to determine whether compounds were intentionally introduced. Intentionally. I thanked him. Hung up. For a long time, I stood in my driveway staring at nothing. 16 medical tests. 16 sterile rooms. And the source might have been a gift. I walked back inside and looked at Chloe sitting at the table doing homework. Pencil between her teeth. Concentrating. Alive. Laughing. Breathing. Because I took a bracelet off her wrist. My phone rang again the next morning. Mr. Harris, the lab technician said, voice tighter now. We've completed advanced testing. I didn't sit down. The concentration levels indicate deliberate contamination. The heavy metals are not naturally occurring at those ratios in vintage alloys. They appear to have been introduced during a recent treatment process. There it was. Not an accident. Not deterioration. Introduced. Could it have happened unintentionally during restoration? I asked, clinging to the smallest thread of doubt. In our professional opinion, no. The compounds were applied in a manner consistent with surface infusion. This would require handling specific chemical agents. I closed my eyes. Can you provide documentation? Yes. Full report. Spectrometry results. Photographs. We recommend you contact authorities. Authorities. I ended the call and walked to Chloe's room. She was listening to music, unaware that her world had just shifted. How are you feeling? I asked. Good, she said. Why? Just checking. No nosebleeds for 4 days. Not one. I drove to the police station that afternoon with the lab report in a folder clutched too tightly in my hands. The officer who took my statement read every page slowly. He didn't interrupt. Didn't speculate. Who gave her this? He asked finally. My ex-mother-in-law, I said. He looked up. History. Yes. Custody disputes. Court transcripts. Threats muttered in hallways. She recently lost a motion for unsupervised visitation. I added. Judge denied it. Motive has a smell. It was in that room. The investigation moved faster than I expected. They obtained records, purchase histories. Chemical suppliers flagged small transactions under Linda's name. Lead acetate, cadmium chloride, amounts small enough to avoid scrutiny, but real. When detectives informed me they had confirmation she had purchased the compounds weeks before gifting the bracelet, Something inside me turned to ice. She claimed ignorance, of course. Said she had been cleaning the bracelet. Said she had no idea. But the forensic analysis was precise. The infusion method required heating and controlled exposure. It wasn't accidental contamination. It was preparation. The day they arrested her, Chloe was at school. I sat alone in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Not grief, not rage. Something darker. This wasn't random danger. It wasn't a stranger in a park. It was family. Someone who kissed my daughter's forehead. Someone who said, "For good luck." The nosebleeds never returned. Within 2 weeks of removing the bracelet, Chloe's blood work, repeated again, showed slight improvement in markers that hadn't raised alarms before but now made sense in hindsight. Low-level toxicity. Reversible. Treatable. Because we caught it in time. At night, I still replay the moment in the park. The chemist's pale face. The command in his voice. Take it off her. Now, if he hadn't spoken, if I had dismissed him, if I had believed the doctor's shrugs over my instinct. I don't finish that thought. Some dangers knock on your door. Others smile and hand your child a gift. When the police told me they had enough to move forward, I didn't feel relief. I felt confirmation. There is a terrible clarity that comes when your worst suspicion stops being a suspicion. It becomes fact. They executed a search warrant at Linda's house 2 days after the lab's final report. I wasn't there. I didn't want to be. I couldn't trust myself to stand calmly in the same room as her. But the detective called me afterward. We recovered chemical containers consistent with the compounds identified in the bracelet, he said. Heating equipment, protective gloves, documentation. Documentation. What kind? I asked. Printed research articles on dermal absorption rates of heavy metals. Notes in the margins. The air left my lungs. Notes. She hadn't acted blindly. She had studied. Any indication she intended permanent harm? I forced myself to ask. A pause. The concentrations suggest prolonged exposure would have worsened symptoms over time. Escalation was possible. Escalation. My hands went numb. She hadn't tried to kill Chloe quickly. That would have been obvious. Dramatic. Traceable. This was slower. Softer. A drip of poison disguised as love. When they arrested her, she insisted it was misunderstanding. That she was restoring the bracelet. That she didn't realize certain compounds were dangerous. But purchase records told a different story. Lead acetate ordered 3 weeks before the gift. Cadmium chloride acquired from a specialty supplier under her own account. Delivery dates aligned precisely with the week she visited my apartment. Coincidence collapses under timelines. During questioning, she admitted she was researching antique metal preservation. She claimed she had mixed compounds to stabilize oxidation. The detective later told me her story changed twice. Details shifted. Memory faltered. Truth does that when it's forced into the light. They charged her with attempted harm to a child and felony poisoning. I thought I would feel satisfaction hearing those words. I didn't. I felt tired. Court proceedings dragged. Experts testified. The lab technician explained alloy infusion methods in precise, detached language. Charts, spectrometry graphs, ratios that proved deliberate contamination. Her defense attorney tried to paint it as ignorance. An elderly woman unfamiliar with modern chemical risks. But ignorance doesn't produce controlled surface infusion. Ignorance doesn't generate margin notes about absorption rates in children. The prosecution presented photographs of Chloe's wrist. The green discoloration embedded in her skin. I had to leave the courtroom for that part, because I remembered wiping blood off her face at 6:40 in the morning, and thinking it was dry air. Megan, my ex-wife, sat 3 rows behind me during one hearing. She avoided my eyes at first. Then, during a recess, she approached. I didn't know, she said quietly. I believe you, I replied. And I did. Linda's hatred had always been personal, focused, sharp. She blamed me for the custody ruling, for taking her granddaughter, for what she saw as humiliation in court. She had lost unsupervised visitation months before the bracelet appeared. The timing wasn't subtle anymore. After 3 months of proceedings, Linda accepted a plea deal. Reduced sentence in exchange for admission of reckless endangerment and toxic substance tampering. Not attempted murder, but close enough to the truth that I could sleep at night knowing she would not be near Chloe again. Permanent restraining order. No contact. Ever. Chloe never attended the hearings. I refused to let her sit inside a courtroom and hear her grandmother dissected like evidence. When she asked why Grandma wasn't calling anymore, I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make dangerous mistakes, I said. And when they do, there are consequences. She nodded. Kids accept boundaries more easily than adults. Within weeks of removing the bracelet, her symptoms vanished completely. No more nosebleeds, no fatigue, no headaches. We repeated blood work 2 months later. Trace markers that had once sat quietly near borderline values had normalized. The pediatrician looked at the chart and then at me. "You caught it early," she said. Caught it, like it had been a falling object. But it hadn't fallen. It had been placed. Intentionally. I kept the lab report in a locked drawer at home. Not out of obsession. Out of reminder. Because I learned something I can't unlearn. Danger doesn't always break in through windows. Sometimes it arrives gift-wrapped. I replay the park in my mind often. The retired chemist's pale expression. The way his voice sharpened when he said, "Take that off her. Now." He didn't know us. He didn't owe us anything. But he saw what I had missed. And he spoke. That single moment rerouted everything. If I had ignored him, if I had brushed it off, if I had trusted comfort over instinct. I don't finish that thought anymore. I've changed since then. I question more. I observe more. When something feels off, I don't dismiss it to preserve politeness. I don't tell myself I'm overreacting, because I've learned that intuition isn't paranoia when it's anchored in love. Chloe made a full recovery. She's 13 now, taller, laughs louder. The faint green stain on her wrist faded completely. Sometimes she asks if she can wear bracelets again. I tell her yes, but I inspect every clasp, every seam, every surface. Not because I'm afraid of the world, because I understand it. The worst part wasn't the chemicals. It wasn't the lab reports. It wasn't even the courtroom. It was realizing that someone who called herself family was capable of calculated harm. A stranger in an alley would have been easier to accept. But betrayal wears a familiar face. And now I know something I wish I didn't. If something feels wrong, you don't ignore it. You don't wait for proof to become obvious. You act. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones hiding in shadows. They're the ones handing your child a gift and smiling while they do it. After the sentencing, the world didn't explode. There was no dramatic shift in the sky. No thunder announcing justice. Just quiet. Linda disappeared into the system. Paperwork. Court dates. Restrictions. Her name reduced to case numbers and supervised facilities. The law had done what it could. But the law doesn't repair trust. The house felt different after everything ended. Not haunted. Not broken. Changed. Chloe stopped waking up with blood on her pillow. That alone should have been enough to restore peace. But peace is fragile once it's been violated. I found myself watching everything. The mail. Packages. Even teachers' gifts at school events. I hated that part of myself. The suspicion. The reflex to scan for hidden danger. But I refused to apologize for it. Because I had almost missed it once. Chloe's follow-up appointments became routine. Clean results. Stable levels. No residual toxicity. The pediatric specialist finally said the words I'd been waiting for. "She's completely clear." Clear. I nodded. Thanked her. Walked to the car. Then I sat in the driver's seat longer than necessary, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Clear didn't erase what happened. It just meant we had survived it. Megan and I spoke more calmly after the case concluded. Not warmly, not like old friends, but differently. Guilt had softened her edges. "She always blamed you," Megan admitted one evening when Chloe was in her room. For the custody decision. For the judge siding with you. I know, I said. I never thought she would. She didn't finish the sentence. Neither did I, because finishing it would mean saying it plainly. She tried to poison her granddaughter. There are sentences that rearrange your understanding of humanity. That's one of them. Chloe eventually asked harder questions. Why can't I see Grandma anymore? I chose truth without detail. She made a choice that wasn't safe, I said. And my job is to keep you safe. She studied my face. Did she mean to hurt me? Children deserve honesty, but not horror. She made a very bad decision, I answered carefully. And sometimes adults do things out of anger instead of love. She was quiet after that. Then she hugged me, just wrapped her arms around my waist like she used to when she was smaller. That moment mattered more than any court verdict, because she trusted me, and I had almost failed her. That thought still sits heavy. 16 tests. 16 times I accepted uncertainty. I replay those months often. Why didn't I connect it sooner? Why didn't I question the timing immediately? The bracelet arrived. The symptoms began. The link seems obvious now, but fear clouds logic. You want it to be random. You want it to be innocent. You don't want to believe someone who shares your child's bloodline could design something so calculated. I've learned that denial is seductive. It offers comfort, until it doesn't. I kept the bracelet, not out of sentiment, out of reminder. It stays sealed in an evidence bag in my desk drawer. I don't open it. I don't need to. I know what it represents. Not just attempted harm, but the cost of ignoring instinct. Sometimes I think about the retired chemist at the park. I never saw him again. I don't know his full name. I don't know where he lives. But his voice echoes in my head. Take it off her. Now, if he had stayed silent, if he had decided it wasn't his business, would I have continued trusting test results? Would I have waited for symptoms to escalate? There are roads I refuse to imagine fully. Instead, I focus on what remains. Chloe laughs easily again. She joined the school art club. She paints bracelets sometimes, ironic, maybe, bright colors, safe materials. I watch her hands carefully when she works. Not because I doubt her, because I know how fragile safety is. The hardest lesson wasn't about chemistry. It was about proximity. We teach children to fear strangers in dark alleys. We rarely teach them that danger can sit at the dinner table. That harm can wear perfume and say, for good luck. Family is supposed to be sanctuary. When that boundary breaks, something inside you recalibrates permanently. I don't trust easily now. Not gifts. Not gestures that feel performative. If something feels off, I don't bury the feeling to avoid conflict. I act. I investigate. I ask questions even if it makes me look paranoid. Because paranoia saved my daughter. Or maybe it wasn't paranoia. Maybe it was instinct sharpened by love. The case is closed. The bracelet is sealed. Chloe is healthy. But the lesson remains. Sometimes the most dangerous people are not the ones hiding in shadows. They're the ones who know your address. The ones who know your routines. The ones who know exactly how to hurt you without leaving fingerprints. And now I know this. If something feels wrong, you don't ignore it. You don't rationalize it. You don't wait for proof to become catastrophic. You act. Because sometimes the threat isn't coming from outside the family. Sometimes it's already inside.